Thank you. We'll call to order the meeting of the Selkirk Fire Service Joint Powers Board. Today is Thursday, April 28th, and we are just after 2 p.m. With us today, we have our Chief, Gavin Gilcrease. We have Jim Woodward representing the Sago Fire District and Will Gadsby representing West Side Fire District. We do not have a representative on the JPA board from City of Sandpoint today. Gavin, do you want to lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have at least one member of the public here today. Any public comments?
Not today.
Okay, thank you. Any board announcements? Staff announcements, Chief?
No, not till the chief's report.
Okay.
I have a quick board announcement, I guess. We have on the agenda to appoint a alternate commissioner for the JPA board at our next meeting.
Great. You are losing a board member.
We have lost.
Approval of meeting minutes is the next item on the agenda, and Tammy, I think we'll move that until next month. Next, we'll move on to Chief's report.
All right. Chief's report for April of 22. Again, everything kind of remains status quo as far as responses go. No real significant incidents have happened since our last meeting. We've had a couple of close calls, and those came in the form of brush fires and people, basically lighting off their slash piles, but not really paying attention to the wind. We keep having close calls with that. And I think it's just, the nature of the beast right now with the weather turning, everybody's out to the yard to get the stuff cleared. And then it's like, oh, well, we need to burn this. Let's hurry up and burn it before we have to get permits, because it's just another hoop we have to go through. So we're keeping track. I mean, we're listening up for them. We're responding to those. Fortunately, some of them are, they're getting away from the people that are lighting them. They're just not cognizant of the high winds that have been going on in the past few weeks, especially. Training update right now. So the resident firefighter training certification is still ongoing. We're still on track to have them done by before the end of May. The crews are going through their wildland refreshers right now, and they should be beginning their marine refreshers here towards the middle of next month in May. EMT certifications are still going on. We're seeing a few of those keep rolling through. A few of our engineers rather be attending a course off-site called Riding the Right Seat. These folks are taking this, and it's kind of a position development course. They are engineers that are qualified to operate in the swing up capacity of a captain or an officer when the officer is off. And this just kind of helps get them acclimated more to being in the right-hand seat of the apparatus and being able to make those judgment calls, kind of helping them with their decision-making process when they're getting on scene. So I think we have 3 or 4 of our folks going to that one. And we are in the planning stages, preliminary planning stages right now of hosting a rope rescue course for the department. It's been several years since we've had a rope rescue style course in the department, and we have a pretty decent opportunity to get one of those in here and host it. It's going to be limited, so we're probably not going to see anybody from the outside. It's only going to be Selkirk members that'll be taking part in that one, just due to the slots in the course. Our policies and procedure review work groups are still ongoing. And we had kind of a hiatus for the last couple of weeks, but we should be picking it back up again the first part of next week. And that's just simply because of the next bullet point. We start the budget prep and getting that stuff going. We got feel we have a pretty solid base for our individual budgets for the departments, as well as establish a JPA budget, which is kind of unprecedented. I don't think we've had one of those before. So we were pretty excited to get that one put together. And I know we're going to be talking about it here in a few minutes, but that's pretty. Oh, and Sarah and I were down in Coeur d'Alene this morning with the L2, what do they call it? The
State.
but levy, but I don't know. It was so enjoyable. so much fun. So that is that's pretty much it for the chief's report, unless you guys have any questions.
Are most of the brush fires that you're encountering that's in an unincorporated area? Or are you running
Yeah.
into an incorporated too?
They're mostly in the unincorporated. We've only had a couple, I'd say probably 2, maybe 3 burn permits issued for inside the city limits, maybe in the last, maybe the last month, something like. There hasn't been many. So I know there's somebody right now that's I'm supposed to get in touch. You left a message earlier. Then they're doing some clearing of a property somewhere. I think they're just, I guess, doing the site prep stuff for it. So I just got to get on the phone with them and talk with them about it and see what they're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we will move to our next agenda item, which is the financial report. So are you on first?
All right, so you should have printouts and would attach to the email, the year-to-date through March, the station wages and benefits by station, and then also the JPA admin through the, I guess, 6 months that they're year-to-date. So so we have for the station wages and benefits, we are about 44 or 43.76 total through the year spent, the year-to-date budget. The year-to-date amount is 44.23. That's the amount of pay periods that have hit throughout the year. So we're very much on key overall for the budget. As you can see throughout the different stations, it does vary depending on the station that it's in. It depends on what the percentage is. If you have actually month questions and whatnot, that I will turn that over to Gavin on the actual station and people staffing and whatnot. The JPA administration, the next page or whatever it is on your handout, I will switch over to that. So just almost there. That is going to be at year to date. That's about 37.71. I shouldn't say about, that is 37.71% expended. Looking good. I did want to point out, last month I wasn't here because I was in training, but I did want to point out that last month when this was summed, the $38,000 that was added into the bottom line, so it was double added. So this is actually lower than last month's. So
Okay.
just so you know that there's a negative sitting over there for the March billing, you'll see there's both a negative. That's because it's actually a credit because it was overbilled last month. So that will catch up. I did talk with Gavin about that. And he said, just leave it as it will. Basically this month it's going to be it'll go from negative to positive. So just so you know that was a summing error on that error. Otherwise, if you have individual questions on line items and that too, I would turn that over to Gavin on what exactly is being spent in the different line items, but overall looking good. Otherwise, I think that's all for the monthly.
Any questions?
No questions. for
What's
us?
driving the difference between stations on the wages?
Well, keeping an eye on it, but I think the biggest factor was we had a couple months where we were seeing COVID go through the shifts, and it was causing a bunch of overtime, more so than we normally have. As far as that goes, other than that, that's the only explanation I really have for it right now. Everything kind of looks like it's settling back out.
Is
We
the
just
other
kind of had a
factor,
couple little hills.
is
I'm
the
sorry,
other
Gavin.
factor with that, I know when we were doing negotiations about the stations, one of the discussions was the minimum staffing levels. And so there is a difference between the different entities on minimum staffing. So are we seeing some of that play out too?
I think our minimum, we're able to hit our minimum staffing. I think where our problem was coming in is we kind of touched on this last month a little bit, but it was being able to shift our people back down like to Sagal or shift up to Sandpoint to be able to cover some of the open slots to meet minimum staffing. It would still generate a bill from one agency to the other, but it would be a straight time bill rather than paying overtime. So it would be a little bit of cost savings. Our issue is that in the past, we weren't doing that. We weren't using the system as it was designed. So we've started doing that. We haven't had to have too much shifting around going on, but we haven't really been paying a lot of overtime in the last few weeks either. So, well, a few weeks to a month, really. I think we were going through payroll. And we were going through payroll this probably the other day, and two day for this pay period, I think there was only 3 or 4 overtime shifts throughout the entire department. So it wasn't bad at all. We're just, we're continuing to keep an eye on it, but as far as the disparity, I know we had some, ups and downs in the different ones, but I haven't really seen anything that's a red flag in it yet. So
Also, West Side bumped our engineer pay up to match Sandpoint and Sagal for a month or two there. So that might be why we're a little higher percentage wise.
6 months into the budget year, would the budget amount be 50%?
No, it's
no, it would
44.
be, I'm sorry, yeah, what was it again?
44.23, because we do 26 pay periods in a year and it falls every other Friday. So part of that's accrued back at the end of the year. So it is 44.23 is what it is as of the end of March.
You have that on here? I don't see that.
No, because that's what it would be expended. So these are actually what's
These
been
are
spent.
actuals. Yeah.
The
every-
actuals,
yeah.
yes, correct.
So can we put that number on there so we can see? Because you have to
Yeah, we can add.
compare a baseline to the actual.
Yeah.
And you also got to realize too that they are on a 24-day period, so their payroll is coming in. It depends on when their 24 days hits the pay period too, because we're getting paid every 2 weeks, but when they are paid every 24 days for their overtime, that's going to make a big difference too of when that hit in there too, because they might 24-day,
Could have that lag built in.
that lag is
Almost,
built in. Yes,
could almost be like a month, even a month and a half,
Yes,
if it's in the
yes.
right spot.
yes. So that plays into the overtime as well.
But budget versus actual would reflect that though.
These are actuals of what's been paid in March. They might have actually had overtime that was worked in March, but not paid till April. So I mean, yes, but no. Depends on the 24-day lag is unique to the fire department because they're on 24 days. So that it depends on, so no, that would not have been paid till April. Their overtime.
What are you using to develop your budget for your 44%? Is that just a straight line?
Yes, that is like what we've been paid through the year. So if there's 24, 26 pay periods in the year, we divide that with what was accrued back, how many days was accrued back at the beginning of the year. In October was accrued back, and then in October of next year will be accrued back into this year. So basically 44.23 of the year has been paid as of that date.
So where you had impacts with staff out due to leave, were those impacts in that month of March? So it looks like that's where we see overtime.
We did have some in March. I wanted to say it was more towards that January, February timeframe. But again, even if it went into February, it might not have hit until March. So that might have been the reason that we saw the uptick in that.
And that would make sense because you're going to get paid in that March for the February time. So you'll see the 6,000 Sagal, for example. That's a big increase over the February and January amounts hitting the actual books.
And I thought that's where, when it starts triggering on the overtime, our minimum staffing Sandpoint Station is 2, correct? Sagal, though, minimum staffing is 3.
Yeah, two at Sagal and 1 at Carywood.
Questions?
Yes. All right, so as mentioned in the chief's report, this will be our first year of actually getting a consolidated JPA budget. After the creation of this, and it's been a required element of our JPA agreement since this was created. So thank you both for working on this. And I know we had a couple of meetings in advance getting prepared for this meeting as well. So
Right.
thank you for all the time that got put into this. I think this will be helpful looking at it as a system. And that's our conversations were, again, that you'll see summaries in this presentation, you'll see summaries by the individual agencies, but the detail on the individual agencies will go to those individual agency boards. This was a look at the system as a whole and what's needed across the system to operate most effectively. The role of the GPA board relative to this budget, again, just a reminder, in accordance with our agreement, it is the GPA board that makes a recommendation to accept this system budget and forward it with a recommendation or work through until you can get to a recommendation to the various three agencies. With that, am I handing it over to the chief or Sarah? The chief?
Unless you want me to talk.
I guess it's me. Sarah will interrupt me when I get it wrong, I'm sure. So basically with any budget, the JPA budget is just built around the 3 components, and that's admin and operations and any capital outlays, capital expenditures that we may have identified. Right now, the fire service budget as a whole and administrative, you can just kind of see some of the categories that we identify as falling into each one: admin, ops, and capital outlay. Different things like just personnel services, liability insurance, office equipment, and operations, training, personal protective equipment, all the way through janitorial supplies and uniforms. Capital outlay is going to be anything that we're replacing because it's dated or it's just it's reached the end of its service life. It's not serviceable anymore. And that could be stations, apparatus, any kind of equipment, things like that. We're also looking at buying anything new, new apparatus and equipment, or even updating technology as that happens. The Selkirk combined total budget, that's a comparison from last year to next year, or this current year rather to next year. 3.4 million for the current year, and we'll move to 3.5 million next year. The JPA shared cost method is identified in the JPA agreement, and it is based on a 3-year average incident volume, which is known as fire call allocation, or FC, and the market taxable value, or known as the MTV. And just that formula is very simple. You just take those two, add them together, and divide it by 2, and that's the weighted allocation for costing of $1. So. And this is just kind of a look at the current year that we're in versus what we've identified for next year. In the current year, our weighted averages are 40, Sandpoint is 40.75%, and Sago is 47.41, and Westside is 11.84. Next year, once we get done with the formula, it changes up a little bit. Sandpoint goes to a 39.35, Sago goes to a 47.32, and Westside goes to a 13.33. And again, that's based on call volume as well as the taxable value of property in the respective jurisdictions. What we did a little bit differently, because there is some, I know Jim likes to point out the disparity between the numbers, but there is a little bit of disparity between the numbers and the call volume this time. I had to go back and call the Fitch and Associates that did our original formula, and they were basically using a formula that the formula is good, but some of the data that goes in the formula, we're not able to replicate it through our system. So we have to utilize the call volume in a way that we can replicate it year after year by they were using the dispatch center and the CAD information, and the difference between those two are the dispatch center basically tracks what they tone out, what the emergency is, but we report on what we find when we get there. So if it's not matching up, they don't change their information on their side. It's basically we're changing it because it goes to that national, the INFRS reporting system. It goes to the National Fire Clearinghouse. So when Fitch and Associates is pulling the numbers, they're pulling out anything that had to do with EMS or in support of EMS, because the numbers, if you let those in, would slant the stats one way or another. So when we go through and we pull ours from what we have, these are the numbers that we come up with. And I called the guy and I basically told him, I said, you can't really use those numbers. And we talked about it for a little bit and he goes, right, as long as you can replicate it, then you're good. So this is how we came up with the new numbers, but this is something that we don't have to depend on another agency to replicate year after year, since we do have to do this on an annual basis.
Didn't you go back to and do a comparison based on pulling the data out of our system as opposed to the CAD data and what that would have done to the baseline?
We did pull, so on the ones that we pulled, this is a 3-year average. So this is going to be 21 back through 2018. The ones that they use again was for 27 through 19, I believe is what they use, or 17 through 19. Yeah,
You're
17
saying
through 19.
validated.
Yeah.
So we pulled it from, we didn't take the 2 years that they did and then put the new numbers in it. We went back and pulled it for all 3. So that's how we got our baseline. Did that answer the question, or you think of something different?
Well, so the baseline year that they gave us was it fiscal 2021 year? Was that the first year that they gave us in their report? I'm trying to remember which year that was, 21.
So the report was finished up in 20. So I think we initiated, we initiated it last year.
But then for those, so in terms of validating that our methodology, the updated methodology isn't too far off from the methodology that they had.
Oh, correct.
Didn't you go and pull it out of Firehouse, what the data would have shown and percentage wise compared to what they had out of CAD?
Yes, we did go back and pull that. It was not, it wasn't really that far off, but it was enough. So when you're getting into, the hundreds of a percent, it does start making a difference. But that was, it was within 2%. I think it was pretty close, but we don't have a way to replicate that without going to dispatch and pulling what they're pulling. I asked him what codes he was pulling out from the INFRS codes, and he said, we don't use those. They just use stuff straight out of the CAD. And I'm like, I don't know how you're identifying what is EMS or what's in support of EMS if that's all you're doing, because ours specifically relates it out. Anything that has to do with 3MS in our system is a 300 series code. So I just could not get him to tell me how he was pulling that stuff out of CAD, or what parameters he was using to pick and choose which ones needed to come out. So that's how we ended up getting to this point. This is just a quick chart of our total incidents by agency from 2018 through 2021. Everybody kind of had a dip in 2020, which was, the year of the asterisk, the COVID year. But everything else seemed to be kind of tracking normally. And then we also did one for total incidents for the entire Selkirk JPA.
So when you're pulling your incidents on this, is this a combination of EMS response and fire response, or?
That is total incidents right there. I'm sorry about that.
And there's been a change of policy too that could be affecting the response on total incidences, because we're not necessarily responding to all, be it BLS calls, correct?
Right. We're still operating under that. We did see in the first,
Because
in
the
the first-
2019 is,
yeah, the first, so in 2019, we ran about 300 more calls-ish, I think, as a total JPA. We did have some that we were running a little bit more to like the assisted living facilities, things like that. But when we got into, I think it was in September, we stopped running to BLS and ILS calls unless EMS requested us to. And more than a couple of occasions during that first quarter and into the second quarter, our call volume had gone down, but our actual EMS calls went up. So we were still running calls, but we were just not running as many of those lower acuity calls. So it's time to do another one of those. So we'll stretch that out over the first 6 months, and to take us in through March, and then see how that's playing out. But it's still kind of doing exactly what we thought it was going to do. Sandpoint's total call volume goes down a little bit. Sagles and Westside's not. It didn't really go down as much, but we kind of knew that was going to happen just because of where the geography and what goes on in Sandpoint. So.
well, and can you go back to that previous slide? So it looks like on this previous slide, relative to the shared costs, one of the drivers driving up specifically for West Side is we see call volume increases in both Sandpoint and Sago, but when you look at your call volume increases in West Side, I mean, statistically, it's a
Yeah, I
much
think
greater increase.
we were underrepresented the first year that the study was done,
Okay,
and we've also manned the station a lot more
okay,
since then. I think
Okay.
1 year it was volunteer, so I think the new numbers more accurately reflect West Side call volume.
It's
We knew it was going to go up.
I can bring that one in the next JPA just to kind of show you. But when you go through and you pulled out the EMS runs, it hovers between that 50 and 55% for each of the districts. So they're kind of the same as you go across. I know West Side in particular, because that one was the one that jumped out the most because it doubled.
yeah,
But if you look at their call volume for that same amount of time, their average call volume was just a little bit better than 200 calls a year. So if you take out about half of that, that's how we ended up with the 110. About half of their calls were EMS related. These are some of the current things as well as some of the future things that we have identified as JPA expenditures. We're pretty much familiar with the administrative side of what the GPA is funding right now through shared costs. But when you get into operations, this is where we've started identifying some of the more, those line items as just shared costs that could benefit us and help us reach some of those economies of scale. So the story I go back to is this all started with a pair of boots. In reality, it was these pair of boots were being bought, and where is this person stationed at? And it doesn't matter where they're stationed at because that person can move around. So we just kind of started using it with uniforms was the first thing we used it with, and then we moved into personal protective equipment. That was the next one that we could identify readily as, even though it is for personnel, we can't pinhole personnel into a certain district because they have the ability to move around. And if they move around at the right time, then one agency is going to be buying all the PPE, or one agency is going to be buying all the uniform boots for people. They just don't need them until they get back to that station. It's just the luck of the draw. Training is another big one. We have several training, I'd say several training opportunities throughout the year that involve all of our personnel. And it's just easier to expense it as a JPA because everybody is benefiting from that training. EMT refresher and the EMT, the continuing education that we do monthly was a big driver in helping to identify that one. Last thing is our capital outlay, just updating some of our technology. We have several computers and NBCs that are just really outdated. Some of those, up to that 8-9 year mark. And, if you've bought computers in the last, 10 years, after about 4 or 5 years, they've already outlived their usefulness. So we're trying to get those on a program, and we're trying to identify how we're able to do that. That kind of gave us that idea with that was when we originally did the email service merger of having 3 different email companies together and just getting everybody in on one server. One server, one service platform, which is a Microsoft 365. But that's what we've identified so far. But it seems like every time we go through budgeting, or every time we're going through, looking at the bills and things like that, that we're always seeing new ways to improve and new ways to help share the costs, so we can all have the savings. So. And this is our shared cost overview for this upcoming year. And the top section is the administrative costs, as we know, the first 3 lines. And then we've identified those fire operating costs. And so that's what brings us to our total of 514,916. And then that would be our shared by the new percentage of $1, that would be each agency share of that. And in comparisons, in fiscal year 22, our current year, we budgeted for 393,441 was what we budgeted for JPA or shared expenses. And this would have been a Sago, Sandpoint, and Westside share as it stands right now for this year. And next year, we identified 514,916, and those are the numbers of the responsibility for each agency moving into next year.
What's driving that's 25% increase in?
It's the so in those, like when we identified a PPE and things like that, that's just our shared cost. I would have to know exactly what I could probably figure it out. It'd take a little bit longer.
The training was about 25,000. The uniforms are about
Yeah.
25,000.
It'll be another shot,
So you're shifting into shared.
Yes.
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
Things that would have been individual agency are going into a shared cost.
Yes.
And this is kind of how it lays out right now. The total fire service budget for Selkirk next fiscal year is going to be 3.5 million, with the shared cost again of 514,000 and change. And that is how the percentage of each budget, it's 13.69% of the Sago budget would be going into the JPA. And then same kind of thing with the Sandpoint as well as with Westside. And this is our system-wide expenditures by the budget area. So we have on top is salaries, benefits, overtime, things like that. That's our expenditures for that. And then we move into some of the shared costs that we identified: accounting and IT services, training, PPE, fuel, some of the utilities, and some of the other services that we do. We did bump up training fairly significantly this year, because we just identified some training needs that we really need to be paying attention to. And training it's a shared cost, is how we want to move forward with that. And it's going to basically afford our folks to get some of that continuing education, some of that new training that they really need throughout the year. And our training budget is pretty lacking right now, even across the board, all 3 agencies. It's not where it should be. It's way underfunded. So
Shared capital. What's that shared capital going to cover?
That's all I'm saying.
that capital right there is all Sandpoint's capital at this point.
Is that the last slide, Gavin?
And that included,
That's
can
it.
we stay on that slide?
Yes, ma'am.
That capital included,
That is a, if we don't get the air compressor on the grant, then we really have to buy the new air compressor, and also it's accounting for another set of our rescue tools. If there's a way that we can fund those rescue tools ahead of that, then we're gonna do it. It's just a matter of identifying the cash. I think we can. We kind of touched base on it a little bit the
Yeah.
other day. I think we're probably ready to move on that, so we can actually drop that down once we get to that point. And again, these numbers are based on the current numbers that we have right now from the county as far as our tax growth. Like I said, Sarah and I were just down there this morning doing some of the L2 training and some of the levy training, and they kind of established their timeline on when they're going to get us their final trued up numbers. So some of these numbers may adjust slightly, but we think it's pretty solid the way it is right now. I don't think it's gonna make that big of an impact.
JPA will fund wildland wages.
That's it. Those are everything that's in our,
system.
basically in our
Overall
system right
system
now,
budget.
right?
So the wildland is only in
Yeah,
Sagal. for
not
example.
the
It's not.
JPA cost. I probably should have titled that different. That was my fault. That is a JPA system wide. This is what it's
Yes.
gonna cost to fund this system. The actual shared cost is about 500 and some 514 and some change.
So like you can think of this as part of this total is going to be Sandpoint, part of this total is Sagal, part of this is West Side, and then part of it's JPA admin, which is then split between the three.
Did we do a breakdown by the three agencies then of the total?
I have that, but we didn't put it in here
Not
because
in-
we
not in
talked,
the
you
slide.
said that this would be fine, so. But if they want to see that, we can.
Thought we had a summary though of what the total amount was across the three agencies.
I have that summary if we wanted. I don't believe in here, no.
Put it in
but-
there.
I don't think we have to do the detail down by the line item, but just what is the total amount across of that 3.5, is it
I think I got it here. so-
Okay.
Sagel's 1.2?
Oh, well, I had it on the right one. Hold on. I jumped off of it.
Is that $31,500 for fuel? That's the total cost for fuel for the system for the entire year.
Well, we're hoping it comes back down. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's with what it is right now, what we have spent kind of in the past, we just we didn't really decrease it. We don't really use all of it, so we didn't want to decrease it because of the way the prices are right now, so we just left it. I mean, hopefully if it comes back down, we'll be able to see a savings in that though, but yeah, we didn't want to mess with it and at least tempt fate too much, so. On the breakout for each agency as it stands right now, Sandpoint will have 1.35 million. Like I say, is 1,353,816. Sagal was 1,716,110, and West Side is 546,529. And as it stands right now, all three agencies are at a zero balance. I mean, they're balanced. We're not going into the year in a negative. So one of the big caveats to that was this year is this June or July, whichever date it was, is the last bond payment for the 65,000 for the truck, I guess it was. This is the last payment, so we don't have to carry that one in next year. So that was a game changer right there, for sure.
For Sagal.
Yep, for Sagal, that was a big game changer. That's pretty much it for the JPA budget as it stands, unless anybody's got any questions.
Further details.
What is the city doing for large capital expenditures? The city needs to replace a truck and how is the city planning for that, budgeting that?
Right now for our vehicles, we actually have impact fees that come in and fire and support that. And our impact fees right now, actually, we're still paying on the ladder truck that we purchased back in 16,
16
17.
before, so it was 15, 16.
So, but we're using impact fees.
Yep.
On the ladder truck. Are they paying for all of that or a portion? All of it is paying for all of that.
When they
lease?
come in,
Right.
the big at the end of the year, if they have enough, then it pays it. If it doesn't, then they don't. So there's been 2 years where it's paid part of the payment.
The rest of it, the air compressor and the tools that are needed that were reflected in the capital budget. Our plan would be to just include it in our budget to go to council. It would be through our property taxes.
Chief, you've been here long enough now to do an assessment of the entire fleet.
We do have some holes that we're going to need to fix or at least take a look at. I know when I was going through doing some of the, it was more of an assessment, kind of just where we are, take our litmus test. And we have some trucks right now that we actually have on the front line that, in my personal opinion, they should have been deadlined. They shouldn't even be in reserve status. And it was just, they're running, but eventually there's no telling when they're gonna stop running. So we have to look. I know one of the trucks in Sagal right now particularly is one of the frontline units out there is probably due to be replaced. I think it may have a pretty good idea on how we can do that, but it's the majority of our frontline fleet is actually pretty good. It's our stuff that's in reserves is probably end of life or very close to it. And we have several, we ended up with a lot of these old, like military style forestry tender tanker things. And they are, the good news is we don't spend a lot of money on them, but they're just sitting there, and we're having to cover on insurance and things like that. And these are probably some of the things that I don't even think we own them. I think it's a matter of we got them from IDL at some point, and it may not have cost us anything, but they are kind of costing us if we're carrying them on insurance. So if it's looking at that, it's probably time to cut that stuff loose. We just call them and tell them to come get them. So, but yeah, just going through that and getting all those. We've just kind of finished up getting some more information off of our rigs because we needed to get some pump serial numbers and makes and stuff like that. So just to kind of get it on a more granular level. But we have a couple trucks that it's probably time to start looking at replacing and start getting the game plan together for sure.
For clarity, one thing we didn't talk about on salaries and wages is, so our CBA had a minimum COLA of 1.5%. We've included in salary and wages in the overall system.
Yes.
2% COLA, 1.5% COLA.
1.5.
Other questions?
No.
Sarah,
Make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
do you feel comfortable at this point with budget and making a motion on a recommendation to the 3 agencies? Do you want to table that for the next meeting? Do
Would
need
you
more
like the
detail?
city rep to review this, or?
What were the percent growth on the total budget in each of the agencies? Each of those taxing districts, we have to make sure we're in compliance with it.
Yes.
So as
Or
far
two
as
taxing districts, I guess.
going,
Percent budget growth.
You put in
should be on the L2, right?
you use the basically methodology was using the same new construction role that they got last year for those other two, assuming it's going to be close to that. We don't get those numbers until, I think today they said
June or something like that.
June, July, the beginning of July is when they have those numbers. So that was an assumption. Going back to what he said is that they might come out to be different than what that is. So that will affect that potentially higher or lower. And then you did throw in the 3% for both agencies as well.
Yeah, I'm just going back, try to find what I'm looking at.
And I don't think you had any foregone, or did you have foregone?
I think Sagal did.
So your budgetary increases from this year to next year on the overall system, predominantly it is building in the 1.5% COLA, which is required by the CBA. You don't have overall a change in the number of personnel. That stayed the same. Capital expenditures that you've included are on the Sandpoint side only.
Yes. No, yeah.
My sense is probably what we are best off doing. Chief is tabling an action on this item until the next meeting. And perhaps if the board members, if you have questions, we can send out this PowerPoint. If you have questions on foregone, what was used balancing in the budget after you look at this, any other questions, if you would send it through to myself and the chief, then we could put together secondary information for the next meeting, just to make sure that everyone's comfortable that you've gotten all of your questions answered, and we should have Kate back at that next meeting too. So we've gone through an overview with Kate in advance of this meeting. So in answer to your question, Commissioner Gatsby, she was comfortable from the Sandpoint perspective with where we were with the budget, capital items included and things like that. But if we table until the next meeting, we will have her back in, and it will give you an opportunity. I know you're just seeing this today. This is the first time that we've had a system-wide budget. And then when it's the three agencies, there's the system-wide perspective, but even with going forward to what does that kind of mean on a larger level, particularly relative to revenue assumptions, what does that mean for our individual agencies? So I think, again, with a list of questions on that, we could come back, refine with some more detail for the next meeting. And I think timing wise, that works for all of the agencies relative to budget. That'll get you off the spot from finding all of those details right now for this meeting, but
30 different
and
things
I'm
open, I
sure
can't find it.
as the commissioners have a chance to kind of look at this as a whole, there's probably other questions that will come up as well. So
That's fine.
Thanks.
And we'll address those as quickly as we can. So we have them.
I think as so long as over the next couple of weeks, if we could get the list of questions, then we will get it put together for a presentation for next month's meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Gatsby, you have a motion to
To
adjourn.
adjourn the meeting. I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second that.
All right, meeting adjourned. Tammy at 2:56 p.m.